For some viewers, the Cartoon Network is best known as the home of iconic cartoons, such as Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, Regular Show, Adventure Time, Steven Universe, Ben Sepulu Gumball, and Craig of the Creek. But for many others, it's mostly known for one thing: the censor. From bleeping out curse words to blurring suggestive imagery, there's no shortage of infamous examples of Cartoon Network censoring its own programming. But in reality, the story of Cartoon Network censorship is far more extensive than most fans know. In fact, much of it was never even visible on screen. That's right. As shocking as some of Cartoon Network's on-screen censorship has been over the years, an even greater amount of it has occurred behind the scenes, with entire scenes being cut from episodes and dialogue being rewritten without anyone ever knowing. Welcome to my channel. And today, we're going to be diving deep into the history of Cartoon Network censorship, covering everything from when they first started to censor their shows in the late 90s all the way up until now. We will be looking at tons of examples of censorship, both on and off screen, and discussing why each scene or line was cut. So buckle up, because this is going to be one wild ride. Part 1. The Golden Age of Cartoon Network, late 90s? Early 2000s? The first wave of Cartoon Network censorship began during what some fans refer to as the Golden Age of Cartoon Network, which took place during the late 1990s and early 2000s, when shows like Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, and Johnny Bravo were all airing. At the time, Cartoon Network was still a relatively new network, having only launched 4 years prior in 1992. As such, they were still finding their footing and trying to figure out exactly what kind of content they were allowed to show. This led to a fair amount of experimentation, with Cartoon Network executives often being unsure of what would and wouldn't fly with audiences. However, as time went on, they began to receive more and more complaints from parents about the content of the shows on their network. As a result, they started implementing stricter guidelines for what could and couldn't be shown. One example of this type of censorship can be seen in the episode Mom vs. Dad from Dexter's Laboratory. In the original version of the episode, Dexter's mom and dad were shown dancing together at a party, and a close-up of their kissing was shown as well. However, in later airings of the episode, the close-up of the kiss was cut. Another example of censorship can be seen in the Powerpuff Girls episode, Dance, Dance, Dance. In the original version of the episode, the girls are shown dancing in a club-like setting, and there is also a brief shot of a man in a gorilla suit dancing with a woman. However, in later airings of the episode, the shot of the man in the gorilla suit was cut. A similar example can be seen in the Johnny Bravo episode, Little Bee, where an image of a bee was shown stinging a woman on the butt, and that was cut from later airings as well. But why were these scenes and images cut? Well, according to sources who worked on these shows, it was due to a combination of factors. On one hand, Cartoon Network executives were simply unsure of what would and wouldn't fly with audiences. After all, they were still a relatively new network and were still finding their footing. Additionally, they were starting to receive more and more complaints from parents about the content of the shows on their network. As a result, they started implementing stricter guidelines for what could and couldn't be shown. During this time period, Cartoon Network was still figuring out its identity and was under pressure from advertisers and parents to clean up its programming. This led to a number of classic Cartoon Network moments being cut from episodes, including the aforementioned close-up of the kiss between Dexter's parents and the shot of the man in the gorilla suit dancing with a woman in Powerpuff Girls. Despite these cuts, however, this era of Cartoon Network is fondly remembered by many fans as the network's golden age. The shows that aired during this time period, such as Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, and Johnny Bravo, are still loved by many and are considered to be some of the best cartoons ever made. Part 2. The rise of network notes and the battles over creative control as time went on. The relationship between Cartoon Network and its creative teams became increasingly strained as the two sides often butted heads over content. Cartoon Network's Standards and Practices Department became known as a strict and sometimes unreasonable entity, which caused many creators to feel frustrated and stifled. Despite this, however, many creators were still able to get their shows produced and aired on Cartoon Network during this time period. Shows such as Regular, Show, Adventure Time, and Steven Universe all premiered during this time period, despite dealing with mature themes such as drug use, alcoholism, and homosexuality. However, as the 2010s wore on, Cartoon Network's censorship became more heavy-handed and more intrusive. As mentioned earlier, during the network's early years, censorship mostly took the form of cutting certain scenes or dialogue from already produced episodes. However, as time went on, Cartoon Network began to implement more extensive censorship, such as requiring creators to make changes to their scripts before production even began. These types of notes often caused frustration and tension between creators and Cartoon Network executives. But most creators were still able to work within the confines of the network's guidelines and produce successful shows. However, as time went on, Cartoon Network's censorship became more heavy-handed and more intrusive. A prime example of this is the episode Excellent from Regular Show. In this episode, Mordecai and Rigby are tasked with taking care of a baby bird that hatched from a very strangely shaped egg. They end up partying all night and completely forgetting about the baby bird, who eventually grows up and leaves. Although seemingly innocuous, this episode was read as being too sexually suggestive by Cartoon Network censors, who demanded that the episode be heavily revised. In the original script, the lines "who knows what kind of stuff goes on around here" and "I do want to know" were deemed too and were cut from the final version of the episode. Similarly, in the Adventure Time episode, "I Remember You," the line "you did on come out of a lady" was cut for being too sexual in nature. However, perhaps no show was more heavily meddled with than Steven Universe. From the very beginning, Cartoon Network executives had major concerns about the show's depiction of homosexuality. In fact, they were so concerned that they originally asked the crew to not even mention the word gay in the series. Additionally, they also requested that any romantic relationships between characters be played down as much as possible. This proved to be quite difficult for the crew, as homosexuality is a major part of the series. However, they were determined to make the show as inclusive and representative as possible. So they worked with Cartoon Network executives to find a compromise. Ultimately, this meant that any same-sex relationships in the series would have to be played very close to the vest, with any romantic feelings between two characters never explicitly stated. Despite these challenges, the crew was able to create a truly special show that has resonated with fans all over the world. Steven Universe is widely praised for its diversity and inclusion, as well as its complex characters and thought-provoking storylines. It is clear that the show's creators did an amazing job in spite of the network's censorship. And if you're a fan of the show, then chances are you probably picked up on all of the subtle nods to homosexuality throughout the series. So, what do you think? Were you shocked by the extent of Cartoon Network's censorship? Which examples of censorship were you most surprised by? And what do you think could have been done differently? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and have a great day.